Are Taylor Swift and Hugh Jackman about to officially become key witnesses in the legal fight between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni? Well, a source indicates they're likely to be subpoenaed. We're going to get into their apparent connections to this case and how they may have to provide testimony in the end. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Taylor Swift and Hugh Jackman will, quote, definitely be subpoenaed in the ongoing Justin Baldoni, Blake Lively legal saga. Wolverine and T. Swift? Well, that's according to an apparent inside source who spoke to the Daily Mail, saying this, quote, could happen at any time. Now, to be clear, this is a source, so sure, take it with a grain of salt. But honestly, when you hear something like that, it is pretty consistent with what we've been seeing so far in this case or series of cases, and this could be 100% true when you think about what their apparent connections to this story are or could be. So what would their testimony be about? Whose side could they help or hurt? Well, let me explain the context of what their value could be, and we're going to get into it a little bit more. But we know that Blake Lively has sued Justin Baldoni, his production company, Wayfair Studios, and others, alleging that she was sexually harassed during the production of the movie It Ends With Us, in which she co-starred with Baldoni, and he was also the director. For example, she claimed that he improvised intimate scenes, talked inappropriately about pornography and his personal life, that he invaded her space. She claims that he and his team then launched a smear campaign against her online and in the media to retaliate against her, to tarnish her reputation after she raised her concerns about his alleged misconduct. She sued him. Then he fires back. He ends up suing her, her husband Ryan Reynolds, and others, claiming that they launched a campaign against him, that they weaponized false allegations against him, and that she ultimately took control over what is essentially, he claims, his film. And he also sued the New York Times, claiming that they colluded with Lively to publish a hit piece about him by publishing out of context and cherry-pick communications and messages to paint him in a negative light, and that they didn't do the proper due diligence. That's his argument. And there's also been some ancillary lawsuits too. For example, there's litigation between Baldoni, his company, and his former publicist regarding allegations of stealing clients and who's responsible for sharing information with Blake Lively and who is behind the alleged smear campaign. It gets a bit complicated, but you get the general gist of what's going on, and we won't go too much more into the weeds here. But I want to go back to the central question here, right? Why are Taylor Swift and Hugh Jackman now potentially a part of this? Well, I'm going to start with Taylor Swift. As you may know, Swift has a close relationship, or maybe had a close relationship, with Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds. I'm not sure what the current status of it is, but Baldoni claims that at one point in time, he believes Lively used Taylor Swift, possibly without her even realizing, to pressure him into accepting her rewrites of a key scene of the film. That both Swift and Reynolds praised Lively's rewrites to Baldoni in person, that this happened during a meeting at Lively's Manhattan penthouse. And Baldoni's argument is that he felt pressured to accept these rewrites, that she used her power, her influence, her famous connections to pressure him and gain further control over the film. Power dynamics, motivations, they're key elements of this case. So for example, there's this apparent text message that Baldoni seemingly sent to Lively that reads, also was working on rooftop scene today. I really love what you did. It does help a lot. Makes it so much more fun and interesting, and I would have felt that way without Ryan and Taylor. Now, it seems Baldoni suggesting he wasn't really being honest, but just basically saying what Blake Lively wanted to hear. In response, and this is critical, Lively reportedly texted back, I told them, Reynolds and Swift, that you laughed a bunch and said it's probably a blend, but you appreciate my passion so much, which of course didn't feel great for me or them, to have my passion praised instead of any specific contribution, meaning she could feel his sense of hesitation in the rewrites, right? That seems to be the argument. And this, by the way, actually led to Baldoni apparently sending Blake Lively a voice note at 2 a.m. apologizing regarding his initial reaction to her rewrites.
I want to start with an apology. Man, reading the second part of your message, my heart sank, and I'm really sorry. I for sure fell short, and you worked really hard on that.
Hey everybody, this is a Law&Crime legal alert. Did you know that children are being diagnosed with serious conditions like type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and the research is potentially linking ultra-processed foods to all this? Yeah, well, Morgan & Morgan is stepping in to fight to hold these food companies accountable. With decades of experience fighting large corporations, they are ready to stand up for the families who deserve justice. So if your child under 21 has been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes or fatty liver disease, then visit www.forthepeople.com/food or scan the QR code on screen to learn more. Now, in Baldoni's complaint, in what appears to be part of Lively's response to Baldoni's apology, she makes this metaphorical comparison of herself to a Game of Thrones character and then seemingly refers to Taylor Swift and Ryan Reynolds as her, quote, dragons. That text reads, "If you ever get around to watching Game of Thrones, you'll appreciate that I'm Khaleesi, and like her, I happen to have a few dragons, for better or worse, but usually for better, because my dragons also protect those I fight for. So really, we all benefit from those gorgeous monsters of mine. You will too, I can promise you." So the mention of Lively's dragon friends appears to be directly referenced in this voice note.
And damn right, you got great friends if that's how you felt and they knew that. And we should all have friends like that, aside from the fact that they're two of the most creative people on the planet. The three of you guys together is unbelievable. Talk about energy and just a force, all three of you. But I just wanted you to know that I didn't need that, because it's really good and it's going to make the movie sing.
So, you can see why Taylor Swift may be a relevant witness, although to be clear, she hasn't issued any public comment regarding this whole legal drama, and it's unclear if she was even a knowing participant in Baldoni's accusations that Lively was pressuring Baldoni. Okay, what about Hugh Jackman? Other than the fact that he too is incredibly close friends with Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively and actually attended the It Ends With Us premiere last year, which by the way has its own can of worms because Baldoni claims that Reynolds and Lively definitely made sure that he, his family, his friends, they were banned from attending the premiere with the rest of the cast and were relegated to essentially the basement of the theater. So aside from that, and whether or not Jackman would provide testimony regarding any of that, there is another issue at play here. You see, Reynolds and Jackman starred opposite each other in last year's smash hit from Marvel Studios' Deadpool and Wolverine. And there was some commentary out there that a specific new character in the movie may have been based on Justin Baldoni as a way to make fun of him after the falling out between Baldoni and Lively and Reynolds. Well, for Baldoni's part, that allegation was seemingly confirmed in his amended complaint. And this read, "Throughout this period, Reynolds and Lively continued to leave breadcrumbs in their campaign for mocking and bullying Baldoni. On July 26, 2024, the film Deadpool and Wolverine premiered, starring Reynolds. The film contained a new character named Nicepool, also portrayed by Reynolds. Reynolds portrayed Nicepool as a vicious caricature of a woke feminist before concluding the character's arc with his violent shooting death at the hands of Ladypool, a character voiced by Blake Lively. Upon information and belief, the Nicepool scenes were added to the movie and filmed in January 2024 after the January 4th confrontation in Reynolds and Lively's apartment, and were intended to be a transparent and mocking portrayal of Reynolds' warped perception of Baldoni. Nicepool commented inappropriately on a female character's attractive body after childbirth and excused his remark by claiming he identified as a feminist. Nicepool also made reference to an intimacy coordinator, which became a big issue in this case too, and even used a hairstyle that mirrored Baldoni's previously longer hair. This is further borne out by the fact that in the credits for It Ends With Us, Lively expressly thanked Gordon Reynolds, the false name that Reynolds used for his credit for portraying Nicepool. So the way it arguably makes fun of him, namely that he acts like a feminist warrior when he's not, is because remember Justin Baldoni had co-hosted a podcast called Man Enough that was described on its website as the show creates a safe environment for a range of perspectives to meet and stay at the table, exploring how the messages of masculinity show up in relationships, body image, privilege, fatherhood, sex, success, mental health, and so much more. Instead of polarizing and demonizing men and masculinity, it invites all humans to participate and thrive in the world. And he's also written books such as Boys Will Be Human, a Get Real Gut Check Guide to Becoming the Strongest, Kindest, Bravest Person You Can Be, But as Lively explains in her complaint, on information and belief, Mr. Baldoni was desperate to suppress any suggestion that he engaged in inappropriate conduct, much less sexually harassing conduct, because it would entirely undermine his carefully curated public image as a feminist ally. So what did Hugh Jackman know or not know about this character and how it was created? He, too, hasn't publicly spoken out about this whole drama. Okay, so with all that in mind, now I want to bring on entertainment and employment attorney, new face to the show, Camron Dowlatshahi. Did I pronounce your last name correctly? If I did, biggest win of this entire day.
Big points. Yeah, okay. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Okay, so let me start here. Do you think it is likely that Taylor Swift and Hugh Jackman are about to be subpoenaed?
They'll be subpoenaed. Whether they actually have to testify is another story. I mean, I'm sure they have sophisticated counsel. They're going to battle these subpoenas. They're going to file what's called motions to quash their subpoenas and prevent the forced testimony. That'll be mostly based on relevance. Now, there's entirely the possibility that these individuals have already agreed to testify, and the subpoenas are just a formality. You know, Taylor Swift was apparently friends with Blake Lively. It's unclear if they're still friends or if it's more of an icy relationship now. Usually you have to subpoena a party anyway to get them to testify. So it could be, like I said, a formality, or there could be a issue in that relationship requiring the subpoenas. And celebrities don't just show up to subpoenas that easily. It requires quite a bit of coordination with their respective counsel. So they're not going to be coming to testify anytime soon.
I just want to follow up on that. So there are situations, right, where they could have to sit for a deposition, but it doesn't necessarily mean they'd have to testify at trial, right? I mean, it seems to me that the reason you would need a deposition is to say, what do you know? What do you not know? That's your first discovery, right? That's your first. You might have an idea of what knowledge they have, but it feels to me that they want to know their connections to that infamous penthouse meeting, Deadpool and Wolverine. I feel like the only way they'd really get that information is from a deposition. But it's interesting you talk about the formality. Do you anticipate a situation where they will have to sit for a pretrial deposition, provide information, but they might not have to testify? Or again, like you said, no deposition and they just testify for the first time at trial? Talk to us about that.
Very unlikely that they testify for the first time at trial. Lawyers are risk averse by nature. You want to know what someone's going to say before you get them on the stand. But typically when you depose somebody, you're anticipating needing them for trial as well. So you're trying to limit and understand the scope of their testimony through the pretrial deposition.
If they fight the subpoenas, like you mentioned, how long can that fight go on for?
A very long time, many, many months. Courts are backed up. So to get a hearing date for, as I mentioned, what's called a motion to quash could be, many, many months out. So it's not an immediate thing. First, the subpoena goes out. You have a certain amount of time to respond to it. And then the process goes to motion practice in court with a hearing potentially pushed out many months.
How much would we see? What do I mean by that? If they're subpoenaed, will we know about that? If they file paperwork to quash the subpoena, I'm sure there's a chance we might be able to see that. And also, if there is a deposition, if a recorded deposition's taken, any chance we'd be able to see it?
Unfortunately not. I wish for our entertainment purposes, right? But the motion to quash is public. You'll see that. The deposition itself, I would assume that that's going to be under protective order. So even, leaks are probably not going to happen of video or, the transcripts from those depositions. So that part is unlikely. Now, everything in this case has been leaked and the judge has reprimanded both parties on that. So there's entirely still the possibility that there's snippets here and there, but I wouldn't anticipate that. But, we'll get, a glimpse of, are Taylor Swift and Blake Lively close enough, and whose witness really is she? Is she being subpoenaed by Baldoni? Is she being subpoenaed by Lively? If she's being subpoenaed by Lively and she fights it, that might show there's an issue in that relationship, right?
That's interesting. That's really interesting. Yeah, because it seems right now Blake Lively didn't bring her into the conversation. It was Justin Baldoni,
Right.
and
Right.
by the way, he brought Hugh Jackman into it as well. I mentioned it before, and again, I'll just reiterate. The idea Taylor Swift was allegedly used by Blake Lively to pressure Justin Baldoni into accepting Lively's rewrites of a scene. Hugh Jackman starred with Ryan Reynolds in Deadpool and Wolverine. Was there a character in that movie that was based on Justin Baldoni to make fun of him? Hugh Jackman attended the It Ends With Us premiere, which became a whole issue because Baldoni has basically alleged he and his family and friends were relegated to the basement. You think these two individuals, these high-power celebrities, you think they'd actually provide relevant testimony in this case? You think they matter enough to this case?
I don't. I think it's a bit harassing, and I think that's absolutely the argument that the attorneys for Swift and Jackman are going to make, that any benefit or any relevance to their testimony is far outweighed to the harassing nature and the burden placed on these individuals who are touring around the world, traveling all around the world, working to appear potentially in person, depending on how the lawyers want to testify. I think Taylor could be a little bit more relevant than Hugh Jackman's. The allegation about satirizing Baldoni's character in a movie, I don't think is as strong and to the crux of kind of all the legal issues of the rewrites involved with Lively and getting Swift's opinion on that and help with that.
So what would you advise Taylor Swift and Hugh Jackman if you were representing them right now?
Yeah, continue to say nothing. No one's winning in this PR battle between Baldoni and Lively. I think you initially saw a wave of support for Blake Lively. I think that the tides have turned against her. So there's no clear kind of winner or leading horse here that one celebrity can jump on and kind of get the goodwill from. There's no benefit here at all. So the less involvement, the better.
Interesting. Now, I actually want to move aside from this because there was something else, other recent developments that have been happening, and I wanted your perspective on. So this is interesting. So it's been reported, through outlets like Page Six and Deadline, that Blake Lively allegedly filed a lawsuit months before she filed her civil rights complaint against Baldoni that started this whole legal war. This lawsuit through her company Van Zandt, so neither she nor Reynolds are mentioned, but it was aimed at issuing a subpoena for all of these text messages on Baldoni's team's side that arguably show there was, in fact, a smear campaign directed against her. It was requesting documents and communications from Baldoni's former publicist, Stephanie Jones, and her company JonesWorks. We mentioned them before. They're now suing Baldoni. And it was reported that they ended up turning over all of these communications to Blake Lively's side, which, by the way, these messages between Baldoni and his team and amongst his team were arguably quite incriminating, and they made their way into her complaint, into the New York Times piece. For example, the infamous "we can bury anyone" text. But apparently, this lawsuit was withdrawn before she filed her civil action, and Baldoni's attorney, Brian Friedman, objected to this, called this lawsuit a sham. Quote, "This sham lawsuit was designed to obtain subpoena power without oversight or scrutiny, and in doing so denied my clients the ability to contest the propriety, nature, and scope of the subpoena. There's nothing normal about this. Officers of the court have a duty of candor to the court and an obligation not to file fictitious lawsuits that have no basis in fact or law. This was done in bad faith and constitutes a flagrant abuse of process." Now, Lively's attorneys, Ezra Hudson and Mike Gottlieb, they defended this in a statement to Deadline, saying there's nothing untoward here, just conscientious and thorough investigation. The Lively parties acted upon reliable information and employed common tools such as Doe lawsuits and civil subpoenas that are entirely lawful and appropriate for pursuing claims and uncovering the identity of unknown perpetrators of unlawful activities. This lawsuit unearthed the Wayfarer parties' documented plan, in their own words and their own text messages, to, quote, destroy Blake Lively, a plan which they executed without transparency, disclosure, or notice to Miss Lively or the public, instead acting in a way they thought would be untraceable. We have absolutely nothing to hide. Miss Lively voluntarily disclosed the subpoena in her first filing, knowing that it would ultimately be produced to the Wayfarer parties in discovery, and that is precisely what will happen as Miss Lively's claims move forward in the proper litigation process. Cameron, who's right?
Well, I've litigated against Brian Friedman. I think it's a little, disingenuous for him to say that it's complete sham. I think it's skillful lawyering. For a while, the legal community was wondering, how did they get these text messages? We were kind of thinking about all the different scenarios. I think it's just skillful lawyering. Obviously there wasn't, an intention to litigate the Van Zandt case fully, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't mean it's a fictitious lawsuit. It doesn't mean it's a frivolous lawsuit. It was a lawsuit that was brought with a certain intent. They got the documents they needed. And, the rest is sort of history. So, Baldoni's team can cry all they want, but it was just, I think, a very skillful and thought out plan by Blake Lively's team.
Well, I also mentioned Stephanie Jones, and there's one more update I wanted to get to. So in a recent filing, Jones has not only initiated litigation against Baldoni, but also Baldoni's publicist and a former employee of Jones at Jones Works, Jennifer Abel. She's a key figure in this case. But she basically accused her of stealing confidential information, orchestrating the Lively smear campaign, and trying to blame Jones for it. But the reason this is coming up now is that she is claiming that Jennifer Abel is now seeking indemnification from Jones Works. Jones Works, you cover me in this. And in a recent filing, Jones Works has moved to dismiss this. First, the argument is she can't seek indemnification under California law because she signed an employment agreement mandating that New York law apply. Second, indemnification doesn't apply because she was acting in her own interests, and Jones Works cites apparent messages between Abel and her alleged co-conspirator, Melissa Nathan, who's Baldoni's crisis management expert, another key figure in this case. She's also being sued by Lively, by the way. And there's one message from Nathan to Abel that reads, "Once you're gone, we'll be on accounts together and make really good money and be happy." Another reads, "You take this bleeping client and never talk to her again." The third argument is Abel can't claim that she was acting within the scope of her employment because she wasn't following Jones' instructions to not hire Nathan when Abel allegedly advised Baldoni's company, hire Nathan. So Camron, it's an interesting kind of in the weeds issue, but the question is, could Stephanie Jones and her company have to cover Jennifer Abel, indemnify her in this whole legal mess? What do you think about this?
Yeah, it's a good question. The choice of law provision, first I'll address that. Where an employee is located is what matters. You can't get around that just by having a choice of law provision. So the location of their work and, where they were really performing everything is what matters. And that remains to be seen. I think there's going to be a fact dispute as to that. And that obviously kind of changes the course of the litigation, whether California or New York law applies. Now, there's a lot of similarities between the law, but California law is certainly more employee friendly. Now, in terms of the indemnification, I think that's going to be another sort of factual issue. But if it's clear that there's sort of a complete separation and that'll be borne out in the text messages, then that's going to be a more difficult case.
Camron, thank you so much for taking the time. Really, really appreciate it. Just another interesting legal issue in this very complicated legal mess. But thanks so much for coming on. And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.